A faint wind slides along a narrow street, the stones still holding a little of the night, the shutters half closed as if the houses are not yet ready to speak, a single rooster in a hidden courtyard calling once, and then waiting the call, folding into the dark wood and lime wash, cool of clay tiles, a smell of damp ash, and sleep. The city listening back. You are above it, in a high, narrow room of an insula, where a lamp has gone out, but its warmth lingers in the air, where a cup on a small table keeps the last chill, where a blanket remembers a shoulder and the soft weight of a name you do not need to know. And as you breathe, you feel the building breathe timber, giving a slow, patient sound plaster, easing the whole stack of rooms, resting like a chest between heartbeats. The Tiber somewhere not far moving with its brown, steady musla, and as the wind turns a page of dust, you understand that morning is coming without hurry, that the city will open the way a hand opens in water, quietly, steadily, with no wish to startle you awake. Hold the city in a wide, unbroken view, the way the first light holds everything at once. The 7 hills, not as monuments, but as the gentle rise and fall of a body lying under a long linen sheet. The lowlands drawn by the river's curve, the banks bristled with mooring posts, and the faint geometry of quays. The bridges like careful stitches holding 2 halves together, the sky already thinning from indigo to a pale mineral blue, soft as crushed eggshell, and the air moderated by the sea somewhere west, carrying a dampness that will lift with the sun and leave a brightness that sits Sicily on brick and tile. The climate is a measured rhythm, spring work in green and rain and the clean smell of wet mortars, summer laying heat into the skin of walls and pulling the breath into shadows and fountains, autumn feeding the city with harvest smells, new oil, fresh must, winter closing the shutters early and bringing the close talk of fires, and in every season the same grammar of light, the way it spills along lintels and gathers in stairwells and halos, the edges of door frames, as if the city is written in light and red by the slow passing of day. Step closer to the Insula, your house of many strangers, rising 5 or 6 stories, where the street is narrow and the sky is a long blue ribbon, the facade banded by brick and rough cast, the ground floor holding shops that keep their own weather in their own time, a baker whose oven warms the lane even before sunrise, an oil seller whose jars give off a green scent like crushed leaves and smoke, a small place that measures fish by weight and salt, a dye stall with buckets dark as wells, and above them a doorway that bends people into a stare that turns on itself like a patient's screw, each lending a little world, each door a pocket of breath and dust and ordinary wealth. The materials are honest, rubbled concrete behind the skin, fired brick in courses, timber beams with saw marks still visible like the memory of trees, lime plaster that drinks light and then slowly returns it, floors of wood that talk as you cross them, thresholds worn into the shape of feet, nails dark with age, a smell of smoke that no airing can fully rinse, and when you lean your palm against the wall you feel a faint coolness, the stone holding the night, the way a cup holds water, offering it back in a slow trickle through the day. Beyond your building, the street is a corridor of shadow leading toward a brighter court, its surface a mix of paving and the smooth polish made by generations of sandals, its gutters shallow and ready for the first bucket of the morning, its doorways carrying the signs of trades and the small marks of private gods, a sprig of laurel above one, a white handprint by another, and as you move the city gives you a careful inventory, a cartwheel asleep against a wall, a coil of rope that smells of hemp and river water, a basket that once held figs and now holds nothing but the shape of figs, a broom leaning like a tired soldier, and above your head the galleries and balconies of the upper floors, some with pots where rosemary and rue make a dry, clean perfume, some with a cloth left to air overnight and caught now in the earliest breeze. The street is narrow, not from poverty but from design, a paced closeness that offers shade in summer and shelter in winter, a closeness that holds voices and slows wind, a closeness that turns the city into a series of rooms under the open sky. Let yourself stand at a corner where two narrow lanes meet and open into a small square. A nodal place, a pause in the geometry where light can pool and people can turn. The fountain there, a simple stone basin with a lioness head that spills water the color of glass. A steady, generous sound that seems to build a roof under which sentences can rest. Book it, arriving one after another. The first hands of the day dipping through reflections and bringing them up. The water smelling faintly of iron and cold. Water does not live in most rooms here. It is fetched and carried and shared, and its journey marks the hours and the errands. It is an errand that makes families cross and recross the city and return with shoulders wet and lips bright. And the fountain is therefore not just a utility but a small theater, where news rides in on the morning and leaves in the afternoon, where children stain their wrists with whetstone, and women learn the weight of each day by the feel of the handle on their palms. Take the city wider again. Let the streets slope toward markets that do not shout yet, toward the forum that is still in its own sleep, toward baths that will beat like warm hearts at midday, toward warehouses where grain waits in the quiet dark, toward shrines where flame keeps a small pact with the air, toward barracks where sandals are sorted and oaths are remembered, toward temples whose steps remember thousands of knees, and whose columns hold up both roofs and stories, and beyond all of that the Taiba brown is bread crust and thick with slow strength, tied to boats that wait for orders in season and current, the smell of pitch and rope and river mud working into the morning like a bass note that will be present all day. You understand that Rome is not only stone and law and decree, it is also the arrangement of needs through space, a choreography of carrying, fetching, resting, bargaining, washing, praying, waiting, and that the city has been designed less like a monument than like a body with arteries and joints and places for breath, a living instrument for the daily music of people. You climb again to the Insula to understand the interior, the way a courtyard can be small and yet behave like a sky, the way a stair can be narrow and yet ventilate a dozen lives. The way windows are not panes of glass in the upper floors, but shutters that let in measured air and measured light, and how privacy here is made not by distance, but by attention, by the way people look away, by the respect carried in voice, by the small agreements that come from living close. A doorway opens, and a room reveals itself as a sequence rather than a box. Bedrolls rolled and stacked by a wall, a chest with its own smell of wood and oil and cloth, a niche where a few figures sit, where the household gods shine, with smoke and a little grease. A low table that carries a bowl and a knife and the memory of last night's bread. A lamp whose soot marks the ceiling with a soft gray flower, and on the floor a mat woven from red or rush, the weevil but audible when a bare foot crosses it. The materials slow you down because they were made by hands. The clay that became tile-barren, faint thumbprints under its glaze of weather. The wood telling you which way the tree grew. The mortar showing a grain like sand and shell. The plaster taking a sheen where backs and shoulders brushed it over and over again. And these things teach you to see time in layers, to read the city not as a fixed picture but as a palimpsest. Each day written lightly over the last, nothing erased. The whole book thickening with use. The Insula itself, if you listen, speaks in slow mechanics. A timber creak, a rope's complaint, a shutter's gentle tap, the soft tap of ash from last night's fire settling in a hearth. And you realize that the building is not static, but in a small negotiation with gravity and weather and the habits of those who live inside it. A negotiation that has gone on for years and will go on for years. And that your presence in this morning is just another entry in the margin. Step out to the roof and watch how the city meets the sky. A comb of tiles, a forest of small chimneys, a scatter of household jars left to dry, a coil of line for drying cloth, a corner where someone keeps a little herb garden. The plants catching sun early so they can lend their energy to meals. Later rosemary. Time a single fig in a pot doing its best, and everywhere the red of fired earth, the red that warms in the sun and gives it back to the night, and beyond the roofs, the hills are a soft, Lone thought the aqueducts drawn like distant sentences across the land, their arches handing water to one another like faithful friends. Wind up here is cleaner and less entangled with cooking and talk. Wind up here tastes of distance, and when you close your eyes, you can hear the city's outline, the repeated things, the small engines of everyday work, the repeated scrape of broom, the repeated knock of a cooper's mallet, the repeated splash at the fountain, and under those the river, always the river, instruction and companion, limit and gift. In tea's light, the colors are patient, the white of marble not a shout, but a soft glow, the ochre of plaster not a stain but a skin, the greens of wreaths and laurel and garland not decoration but assurance, the blue in the sky a calm promise, and each color makes a place for the next. The city reading itself in a quiet voice. The smells are a map as well, warm bread and olive oil with smoke and damp wool, clean rushes and cured leather, wet limestone and sunstruck, dustfish, salt and resin pitch, crushed grape from yesterday's press. And the senses together write a language you can understand without effort, a language that does not ask you to be clever, or fast, a language that says, this is how a day is built, slowly by the fitting together of all small things. You return to the stair and then the street, and let your hands learn the scale of the place by leading along the walls, your fingers collecting lime, your palm testing the cool, your shoulder remembering the past curve of someone else, and you notice how the city opts between tight and open hallway and room, narrow and square, and how this rhythm makes walking into a gentle breath. Exhale and inhale. And as you pass a doorway, a fragment of conversation crosses the threshold and dissolves, and a cat makes a decision to claim a patch of sun, and a boy holds a loaf with both hands, and a woman lifts water with a sound that must be the same in every century, and a man fixes a strap on a sandal, and a wheel takes its first turn, and the day, pale and uncommitted a short while ago, becomes quietly sure of itself. Pause at the bathhouse door where steam will later lay its warm hand on your chest, but now it is only a promise, a stone facade set with order and measure, an inscription that loves symmetry, a threshold worn to satin by a million bare feet. And even when empty, the building hums with a kind of patience, pools, remembering the weight of bodies, benches, remembering the slow shapes of talk walls, remembering the ghosts of conversations that never wanted to end. Across the way a small shrine breathes with its own flame, a cup with a little wine left in it so the god will not feel thirsty. A wreath that is dried gracefully and holds the shape of gratitude, a bit of ash, a bit of wax, a bit of smoke. The altar like another little hearth for the city's heart. Let your attention widen to the roads leading out, paved and sure, bordered by markers that are less like stones and more like syllables in a long-spoken line, each one keeping measure, each one saying you are somewhere exact. And these roads are not just for legions and messengers. They are for grain and fish and tools and cloth and letters and hope and memory. They pull the countryside into the city and return the city to the countryside. And because of them, breakfast is nearer. Evening is kinder. Winter is not a shutter slammed, but a season to be prepared for with care. Along these roads the land does its work, the vines wrapping themselves around the stakes, with a grace that looks like learned. Disciplined the olives threaded in their gray-green like a thought that refuses to be rushed, the fields waiting for the right moment to break or rest, and the city hungry and grateful holds out hands in the form of markets and warehouses and mills. Return again to the Insula, and lie down your eyes within a single upper room where the day's first light has painted a thin rectangle on the far wall, where a folded tunic keeps a faint smell of sun, where a belt hangs with its bronze clasp, a little green at the edge, where a stool with a clean scar tells you that wood forgets and forgives, where a jug of water is standing, the surface a dim coin, where a sprig of bay has dried and still holds its leaf shape, like a memory that does not insist, where the small gods wait with patience, older than the thread that sewed the garment on the chest below them. And in this room you feel the size of the city again, because a city is finally 1,000 rooms like this, each with its small weather and its weather of love and work and breath, each contributing its warmth to the whole, each, in the earliest morning, at peace. Now make a slow circuit of the morning with your mind, inside and out, down and up, street and stair, roof and court, market and quay, temple and bath, until every piece has been seen not as a list but as a braid, each strand crossing and friendly to the next. And when you set the braid down on the table of your mind, you will see that it holds, that it can be lifted without coming apart, that the city is simple in its complexity, and that this simplicity will carry you through the rest of the day. Let the morning widen, not by haste, but by layers, the way steam widens from a cup on a cool table, and follow the first errands as they braid into habit. At the baker's doorway, a pale orange lives in the oven's mouth, the paddle moving like a practice door, loaves sliding in with a soft, deliberate hush, and coming out with a faint crackle that is almost a voice. He dusts flour from his wrists as if turning pages, checks the color not with worry but with memory, and stacks the round forms so their warmth can pass from one to another like a quiet blessing. A child stands on tiptoe to see whether the top is split, just so a seam like a smile. And the child's breath, misting the cool air, vanishes as the loaf answers with its own warm breath. And this exchange, small and ordinary, sets a pace that the rest of the day will keep. Down the lane, a fuller's shop is already wet enough to smell of work. Cloth has come to him used and loved and tired, and he will give it back, relieved and ready. He beats and treads, soap root and water making a clean foam, his feet finding a rhythm older than talk, and the cloth answers by lightning. Outside, the sun reaches across the threshold and dries the edges of a folded tunic, and the tunic drinks the light with a gratitude almost visible. The dyer nearby tends his vats, as if keeping watch over seasons, blues and reds, and the dull gold of Earthshade's vapors, rising like small thoughts that do not disturb anyone, and he stands with a stick and a come-eye ready to lift the cloth at the time agreed on by both color and hand. When Adoys, the wet fabric shows the future of dry fabric, and the color glows for a moment with a depth that feels like something found rather than made. The mill where grain becomes flour sings in a narrow register stone speaking to stones, wood to wood, rope to rope. A donkey walks a patient circle with a patience the city does not waste, for it gives the donkey shade and water and a steady hand. The stones turn, the flour falls, pale and fine, and the woman thinks of the bread that will be possible this afternoon if the heat stays reasonable, and of the porridge that will be certain if it does not. On a sill, a simple sundial has been set down as casually as a cup, and its shadow makes a line that reassures without insisting. Time measured not to rule the hand, but to accompany it. A companionable line that will shift almost imperceptibly while the day is busy elsewhere. At the corner where two lanes lay their backs together and rest, a fruit seller sets out figs, the skin dull violet, the inside promising a red that belongs to late morning more than to night. He presses one gently with the thumb that has learned the language of ripeness, and arranges the rest so the eye moves across them like a boat across smooth water. Beside him, a woman places a wide basket of greens that still carry the field. Their leaves cool to the touch even now, and a jar of olives, as black as small moons. She turns the jar so the light can visit each surface, and leaves it there. Coins pass without noise worth remarking hand to hand, and with each exchange a few words go to not heavy words. Not words meant to be remembered, but words with the weight of bread enough to be felt, and then to disappear into strength. The teacher opens a small room that smells of new wax and old wood and brings out a tray of tablets, each one the size of two joined hands. The children come with a tread that tries to be serious, and mostly is, and they take the styluses from the bowl near the door and they sit where the light falls level. For a time the room is full of scratches, the pencil sound, of letters rehearsing their shapes, small voices reading the day into columns. And at the front, the teacher speaks more slowly than the street speaks, weighing each sentence, so it'll sit properly and the sentences learn the habit of sitting. Outside, the hum continues, carts promising to go straight and then turning, sandals making agreements with dust, someone calling a name and getting an answer that arrives like a bird to a hand. The city, while children learn their letters, keeps its own script going. The same script it has used for as long as anyone can say. The script of order bread, stone, shade, time. At the fountain, a woman braids her hair with water still on it so that when it dries, the braid will hold its pattern and stay cool on the neck longer. She knows which hours put the fewest people at the basin, which hours ask for patience, which hours favor a conversation with someone she will not see again for weeks. Today, the basin holds a single reflection of a passing cloud, and she regards it as if checking whether the day is in order, and it is. 2 men bring a yoke between them and suspend an amphora from the bar, and when the lion's mouth has filled it halfway, they stop and listen for the pitch that tells them the weight is becoming serious. And then they let it rise a little more until the sound changes again. A boy whose job is to help looks up and learns this without remark. He will know the sound all his life and will not remember having learned it. The scent of garam passes by, not loud, not harsh, just a note that belongs, a sea note. Walking inland, the fishmonger is crushed ice made from the night's cold and the aqueduct's mercy, and lays fish upon it as if tucking them for a brief rest. Scales take the light like coins in water. A knife moves through flesh that smells clean, and the cleaned fish is wrapped not to hide but to protect, and is sent away in happy hands. And the cutting board is rinsed, so the next act can begin as if the first had not ended. In another stall, a bronzesmith warms a small crucible, and lets a curl of metal learn how to be liquid, and then how to be something else again. The mold waiting, the channel ready. The whole table, a small world with its own season's winter. When the metal is cold and still, summer when it runs like a bright thought, autumn when it settles, spring when it appears in the shape of a clasp, or a pin and cools to usefulness. Clothes for the day come from hooks and chests, a tunic that remembers shoulders, a belt that remembers the waist it has circled many times, sandals whose leather has been taught by walking to be kind. A woman settles her stola and draws the palo with a movement learned from watching, and from being watched by mothers and aunts, and neighbors who corrected with a smile rather than a word. A man draws his cloak over one shoulder and tests the clasp to see if the morning has changed the clasp esmo mind. The cloth smells faintly of sun and storage, a clean dust that belongs to things kept with care. These motions have a gravity softer than law, and the city is held together by as many of these soft gravities as by marble and decree. Work at the forum is not loud, though there are many voices. Under a portico, a money changer's table reflects the light in small flashes, and his ear keeps a record of coins as they speak to wood and to each other, the high ring of bronze, the quieter sound of silver, the duller note of copper that has seen more hands and more weather. He measures with his eyes, with a scale, with his years. A petitioner waits in a shadow that has waited for generations and rehearses in his head a sentence that will present him as moderate, as reasonable. As a person the law might like to help, a scribe takes down a brief that is not urgent, but will end up meaning much to someone who cannot be here, and his reed set at a shallow angle opens, a neat line the way a keel opens water. The courts will move later, slowly, and with the gravity of men who like to look as though they have never hurried in their lives. But even now, the day is preparing a space for their steps. When heat rises, the city shifts into its other arrangement, and the awnings come down like eyelids and air moves in gratitude along their lower edges, and those who can pull their stools a little deeper into shade do so, and those who cannot simply change their breathing the way people who live long with a climate learn to make agreements with it, rather than to fight it entire. In kitchens, the fire is reduced to a minimal speech. Chickpeas soften in a quiet simmer. Barley thickens into a softness that will accept a spoon. The knife finds the leaves that taste best sliced thin. In these rooms, someone is humming, not for any reason, but because the mouth and the chest are pleased to do it the way hands are pleased to. Straighten a cloth so the edge is parallel to the table's line, the way eyes are pleased to follow a square of light as it travels across the floor, and briefly makes a pattern of the mat that is more visible than usual. After the midday bite, a barber's chair holds a man who leans back into the small luxury of being tended. The razor is kept honest with a careful stroke on leather, and then the cheek learns a new smoothness. And a pot of oil the size of a small fruit offers a scent that remembers bay and laurel in a distant field. The barber is part surgeon when needed, part friend when allowed, part news, part quiet. Hair falls in small commas to the floor, and the broom writes them into a little pile and then into a pan. The man stands lighter and thanks the chair with the hand that touches its back without thinking. A weaver steps back from a loom and regards a cloth that has finally done what it promised. And in that moment, her shoulders tell the truth of patient work. The pattern is something her hands knew before her mind could describe it. The threads show how time behaves when it is arranged into usefulness. She cuts the cloth, binds the edge, runs her fingers along the length, and folds it into a parcel that contains the afternoon's satisfaction. Next door, a leather worker pierces a strap and listens to the punch, as if the punch could announce the future strength of the whole. And when he threads the thong through and pulls, the resistance is right. He smears a thin line of oil and rubs it in as if telling a story to the leather. And in a way he is a story about rain and sun and steps still to be taken and streets still to be learned. Children spill back into the lanes with hands that smell of wax and wood and dust and fruit. They do not run as if the city were a race. They run as if the city were a friend who likes a little chase. A girl draws a pattern on the ground with a charcoal. It took no effort to find a circle and another circle and a line between them, and tells the boy beside her that one is the fountain and one is the moon, and the line is a street that nobody knows about yet. He accepts this comfortably, because in Rome one can add a street with a stick and it feels true for as long as the drawing lasts. When they tire, they sit by a doorway and drink from a small cup that has been offered, and the cup travels to another hand, and the day rests while they do the sun kneeling toward the west, and an act that looks nothing like kneeling and is exactly kneeling. There are errands that belong to afternoon as surely as bread belongs to morning. A woman takes a small jar to be refilled with oil. The shopkeeper pours with a hand that has been taught to be steady even when the day is not. He wipes the lip of the amphora and makes no waste. A man brings a broken hinge and leaves with the same hinge mended, and a new respect for the simple authority of a straight pen. At a stall, a storyteller has set a little space of shade with a cloth and a stave, and a few people lean while he speaks. Of a hero who walked from one end of a place to another and learned nothing except kindness. And this is enough for afternoon. The story does not try to end. It swells and thins and swells again, like the river. And as it does, a little circle of listeners grows and then shrinks and then grows, and time passes without feeling the need to announce itself. The bath, when you go, has been waiting all day to welcome you, and is not wearied of waiting. You pass through rooms that change the air the way a set of hands might warm yours by holding them, and your skin recognizes these rooms as something like kin. You sit in the tipodarium and speak a little to someone who knows the name of your grandfather and who remembers when your sister cut her hand and how it healed. And you do not recount accomplishments. You recount the weather of your life. And the other person nods, because the weather is always important. You are scraped clean by a man who is skillful without hurry. The strigil takes yesterday's labor and makes of it a small coil that is then wiped away with a cloth that will be rinsed and dried and ready for someone else. In the hot room, the ceiling gathers the sound of breath and gives it back in a soft chorus. In the cold pool, you rediscover edges you had forgotten, and when you climb out, they are yours again. Bright, without being sharp. Clean. Your senses are sharpened in the gentle way that means food will be tasted fully. Evening markets show their second faces, and the cellar whose morning was fish now forwards anchovies that have rested in oil and herb and lemon, their soul to study and balance. A woman who had only greens at dawn now offers a pie that is more herbs than crust. It's steam talking about gardens. Someone brings dates that have been resting in a jar with wine and spices, and the jar is open to general approval. A handful of nuts changes pockets with a sound like a small rain on a roof tile. A potter whose morning was clay and wheel now stands with a tray of lamps the size of a person's palm. Each with a spout shaped like a thought, each with a disc for oil, each with a wick that has been primed. He demonstrates the flame how small it can be and still be used for land, sets the lamp back among its brothers, and the tray briefly looks like a map of little suns. There are people whose lives enter yours for only the length of a narrow street and yet leave a good line in the day. A water carrier whose shoulders are faithful as yokes, A guard whose eyes find the stones more interesting than the faces, a midwife whose hands smell of rose leaf and clean cloth. A physician whose kit is mostly attention and reassurance, a mason who passes his hand over a wall and feels with his palm what his eyes confirm, that the mortar is ready for the next course. You meet them by chance and depart by courtesy, and the city holds the meeting without needing to keep a record because it has kept so many like it that it has become, in a way, the record itself. Bring the day slowly toward its soft hinge without crossing it yet. A household begins to assemble the things that will not be needed until tomorrow. Tools return to their chosen corners, brooms set upright. Bristles will last a few vessels rinsed and left inverted to dry. The table wiped with a cloth and the cloth rinsed, with a cup of water that served a last useful purpose. A sprig of laurel is replaced in the niche, the old one thanked and set aside, the new one given the place, with a movement that is more listening than placing, and a small crumb of bread set, where small crumbs of bread have been set since before your grandparents. And the lamp's wick trimmed so it will mind the night. The window shutter is closed to a finger's width, enough to keep the familiar path of air without inviting the unfamiliar, and the bedroll is unrolled, and the room breathes as a larger version of the person who will lie down in it. And still the street carries its late errands. The measure of steps shortened, the space between voices widened, the sound of a cartwheel like a sentence that has learned to end kindly. A man in a corner stall sharpens a blade not because he will use it tonight, but because tomorrow will be more generous if steel is ready. A woman counts a small string of coins 2 times and then a third, not out of fear but out of habit, and then ties them away and lets her hands fall to her knees and feels her shoulders. Remember, they are not only for carrying. A boy turns a game stone on his palm until the warmth from his skin sets in and the stone feels as if it were planning to speak. And then he sets it down on the step where it will wait without complaint until morning. A girl plucks at a loose thread on her tunic and then smooths it, and then forgets it and looks up at the sky where 1 star has been permitted first place. When the first lamps bloom along the lane, the city does not change into another thing. It becomes more itself, in another register, and your body knows the register without needing words. You carry the last water of the day. You close the last latch. You put aside the last idea that needed putting aside, and you keep the rest. You step over the threshold of your room, and the room accepts you, and the day collects itself in your chest and sits there. Not heavy, not light, exactly the weight it should be. You have walked the markets and the workshops, you have listened at the fountain and inn. The bath you have been carried by shade and by custom. You have given your hands to your work and your eyes to your neighbors. You have been reminded by bread and oil and water and cloth what is required and what is grace. And the evening that approaches is the natural continuation of these things, and will be met without effort. And so when the lamp is lit, and the flame steadies, and the air takes on that familiar sweetness that belongs to oil and wick and warm clay, the day itself leans toward rest. The voices on the stair are few and friendly. The last broom scrape at the landing sounds like a line under a paragraph. The window now lets in the night, like a guest who knows where to sit. This is the place where the day yields its tools to the night's use, where a cup becomes a weight that holds a page, where a chair becomes a witness that everything was done with care, where a folded cloth becomes a promise that the morning will be almost exactly like this one, and it being almost exactly like it will be completely new. And with that, you can move with no break into the quiet the city has prepared, the quiet in which evening becomes night with the softness of a breath. Let the first lamps be only beginnings, small suns cupped in clay, their light not conquering the dark but teaching it to be gentle, and let the air in the lane cool 1 degree at a time until shoulders loosen without anyone deciding to loosen them, and let the city lower its voice not to whisper, simply to talk nearer the ear. A woman lifts a wick with a sliver of reed and coaxes the flame to a steadier posture, and the lamp replies with a soft, even breath. She shades it with her palm the way one might calm a skittish foal, then sets it where it'll make a low island of gold on the table. And on that island she launches the evening, bread on a board, a bowl of olives glistening like small moons after rain, a dish of beans that remember the kindness of fire, and a little wine given air so it can speak in a softer voice. The stairwell of the Insula learns the new music quickly, feet unhurried, cloth touching plaster with a sound like dry leaves. Someone clearing his throat not to begin a speech but to end the day. And on a landing, a neighbor pauses with a jug and trades two sentences that are neither news nor obligation, only the confirmation that we were here today. We will be here tomorrow. Sleep well. Let the lamp mind the dark. Below, the courtyard collects the evening like a bowl, catching the thread of a song from a room that would not sing at noon. The modest clink of cup against cup. The patient scrape of a broom finishing its last arc. The faint, fading hiss of a pan that has just been persuaded to stop working. And in the middle of these domestic stars, the lion-headed spout at the wall gives water with the same steady heart it gave it this morning. A slender rope of sound that ties the day to itself. Food carries the law of moderation into comfort. And the mouth learns again how to measure, how to slow, how to find sweetness in the plain thing done well. And the hands remember where to rest between bites. And the eyes accept the smaller horizon of the table is enough. A father cuts the loaf with a knife that has been honed to kindness rather than brilliance, and the slice falls obediently into his palm. He gives the heel to the child, because the heel is for learning strong teeth, and because his own father did so without comment, and because certain customs are a kind of chair the body sits in without thinking. Oil is poured with a care that gives it dignity, and the dish glows faintly. And when the bread meets it, the lamp writes a small, gold sentence along the crust. In another room, an elderly mother winds wool with emotion that lives equally in her fingers and in the memory of the house. The yarn as soft and obedient as a well-tended path. And beside her, a granddaughter counts under her breath, not to control the skein, but to teach time how to be gentle. They speak very little because the wool speaks, and the lamp speaks, and the evening has its own grammar. A young man, newly apprenticed, spreads his tools on the cloth, the way a careful priest might arrange vessels, wipes each blade with a bit of oiled rag, tests each edge on the hair of his forearm and on the suggestion of a nail, not to prove sharpness but to promise tomorrow's accuracy. And when he wraps them again, he is wrapping the day and saying, "Thank you for letting me learn you. Thank you for being patient when my hands lagged behind my intention." Beyond these rooms, the lane breathes. An alley cat unspools itself along the sill and folds its paws with ceremonial gravity. The shutters tilt to the evening like eyelids, negotiating with sleep. And above all this, a stripe of sky receives a first star and then a second. And when a third arrives, the silence says yes. We recognize you. You have been expected. A man in the doorway of a modest wine shop fans a brazier with a red mat. Not from need, from affection. And inside the room the talk settles into circles. One about the weather on the road to the coast. One about the price of good oil compared with last year's price. One about a horse that has learned not to shy at the shadow of a cart. And none of the circles requires a center. They widen and narrow like ripples, and the evening holds them without effort. Children, held later than usual by the sweetness of cool air, learn the ceremony of bed as a game that everyone knows the rules of. The mat shaken and made flat. The blanket folded back with a flourish that is really a kindness to the future self. The cup placed near the hand that usually reaches in the night. The sandals set parallel to each other as if they were two small animals sleeping nose to tail. The little gods given a crumb and a nod. The last thread tucked. The last question silly, profound, indistinguishable answered by a sigh that manages to be both amusement and wisdom. A lullaby does not so much begin as resumed 3 notes from a voice that has sung those 3 notes for years, and when the 4th note arrives it does so like the familiar bend in a path turning without surprise toward a door that always opens, far off, behind thicker walls. A scribe-s lamp leans over a sheet where the day-s dictation waits to be rounded into fair copy. He reads the line under his breath, removes a thorn of hastiness, polishes a clause so it'll carry a more temperate meaning, and returns the reed to its slow work. The room smells of soot and glue and the modest pride that belongs to making thought behave. Next door, a midwife checks her kit as a sailor, checks a tight string and cloth and oil, and a small bronze pin and clean water in a Jug then sits with her hands quiet in her lap and listens to the lane as a doctor listens to a chest for the night sometimes. Calls her, and it is her craft to answer without waking fear. Climb, once more, to the roof where evening becomes night in a wider octave. Tiles release their heat in a slow exhalation that rises past your knees and disappears into a mild draft that smells of stone and time. Someone keeps 3 pots near the parapet, and each pot drawn in lampglow looks like a planet, a little red world of clay with its own weather and its own orbit. Around a dish of water set to cool and above your head, the sky is a patient library, long shelves of familiar stories, the brighter ones where sailors and shepherds find their way, and the dimmer ones where scholars lean during festivals and argue with affection. An old man leans his elbows on the low wall and tells a boy that the bright scratch that crosses from west to east is a messenger, and the boy is satisfied because the speed is exactly right for messages of importance. Back below, the tavern at the corner becomes a place to lay down one's tired language and take up the small, well-handled words of neighbors. The wine is thin and honest, the bread cut generously, the cheese just firm enough to ask the knife to do a little work, and a bowl of olives with stems still attached invites the table to share their salt in an easy rotation. Stories are exchanged in currencies that do not devalue. How the Bath's hot room felt today after the wind's shift. How a mule that usually drags its feet trotted of its own accord at dusk. How the market began with an argument about weights and ended with a laugh and a shared FIG. A musician with a lyre tunes by conversation rather than calculation meets the room where it already is, and then releases a song that rises straight through the smoke of the lamps, as if climbing a stair it knows by heart. The night watch takes its places with the dignity of a craft that prefers not to be noticed, a pair at the mouth of a wider street, another passing under the shadows of arches, men whose sandals ask only a little of the road and who answer in return with attention. They measured the quiet notice, the odd cart that hurries when carts should not. Hurry nod to the man returning late with a folded stool under his arm. Help a staggering fellow choose a direction that will lead to a door he can knock rather than a ditch he would regret. And occasionally without fanfare they remind someone that the lamps must be minded and the brazier should not be left jealous for air. Above them, someone leans on a sill and watches their passage, not to judge, to be assured that the city is remembering itself, even while it tries to rest. Rooms become smaller as night deepens, but their smallness is generosity, a way of saying this is everything you need in a reachable circle. The bedroll that is not a luxury and so cannot betray you. The chest that holds your modest wealth and the smell of clean cloth. The niche where flame teaches devotion to breathe slowly, the stool that remembers your weight and forgives it, the cup that tastes of cool water and glaze. A woman rubs oil into hands that have gripped and lifted and wrung and plucked and sliced. The oil returns to her the shape of her fingers as if giving back a tool after borrowing it, and when she flexes her palm, the joints answer with small contented sounds. A boy sleeps with a hand still touching the prize of the day, a smooth stone, a bronze ring, a string of colored wool, and in the morning his hand will be empty, and he will not remember letting go. Dreams arrive like visitors who know the house well enough to let themselves in but are polite enough to wipe their feet. And they bring versions of the day with them that are a little kinder at the edges. The stair longer and broader and easier to climb. The market shaded by trees that are taller than they were at noon. The fountain's water cold enough to make the teeth ring with pleasure. The bath sending steam that smells faintly of rosemary. In the dream, the city keeps the same rules. It kept waking no haste, a preference for ordinate marvels, a respect for the body. As need to be neither hero nor machine end. When the dream shifts toward something larger, a hill, an arch along road with its markers like syllables, it does so in the same gait as the day, never rushing the heart, always traveling within the reach of breath. There are, even at night, labors that do not break the quiet, but strengthen it. A baker comes earlier than the dawn and opens the door with a key that loves the lock. He lights the oven with a patient hand, and his first companions are coal and air, and when the first heat blooms against his face, he smiles, because the city has decided to continue. A carrier of water tips a jar into a trough, where animals will drink before the sun asks them to work. The water licks the stone, and the sound takes its place in the night and calls no one to witness. A midwife is woken and goes tucked into the shawl, is a bar of good soap and a cloth, and through the lane she passes like a sentence that is necessary. Not urgent, and in a room at the far end of the street a new cry will be rapped and soothed and taught that this city can be gentle. Somewhere a small discord begins the quick argument of two men who drank past the place where grief turns into sleep hand. The building receives it, thins it, lowers it and offers it back as breathing, for there are arts in which stone and plaster excel, and one is the conversion of sharpness into roundness. A shutter clicks once, not in alarm, but in acknowledgement, and the watch steps near long enough to let attention be felt and the voices yielding to the architecture, and the habit fold themselves into apology and then into nothing at all. The lion's mouth at the fountain does not comment. Water continues its sentence, which is, here, here, here. The grain dealer, who sleeps badly, unless he counts something, counts the sacks in his head, and then, failing that, counts the breaths between the small sighs the building makes, and finds to his satisfaction that they are regular, and in this regularity is a promise that dawn will not be stopped by anything anyone did today. A widow who has learned how to hang a pot from a hook so it will not complain at night lies awake only long enough to remember the names of her children and their order of birth, and then to repeat the names backward, and then she sleeps. A soldier on leave forgets drill and remembers the sequence of streets from the river to the bath, and from the bath to his sister's door. And halfway through the remembered walk, he is dreaming he is at the door, and when someone in the lane passes, and the plank of the floor speaks, under their step the dream obliges and opens the door. On the roof again, very late. The city is a dark sea, with islands of lamp and thought, and a woman who has not slept steps out with a shawl and lets the night take the heat from her face. She looks toward the east where no light shows, and then toward the west where the day has been properly put away, and she breathes the names of things she loves without needing to attach them to persons. Bread, figs, cool water, the way wool yields when asked kindly, the way sandals know the way home. And in this litany she discovers that weariness has shape, and that the body, having been fully named, can enter sleep. When sedues the shawl slips, and a hand from the door lifts it and covers her, and the gesture is the city's last task before it too closes its eyes. And if you step once more through the rooms, while everyone sleeps as a thought might pass through the mind without waking it, you will find order everywhere, not the order of a parade, but the order of a heart cup set near cups, blades turned safely inward, the lamps, wick trimmed to a modest wish, sandals paired, the broom stilled, the little altar content with a crumb, the water jar full enough for morning, the latch laid down, the bed made with a roomy kindness, and the smallest things pin, thread, coin, comb each resting exactly where a sleepy hand will reach. And this is an architecture of mercy. This is the city's hidden craft, the arrangement of small securities that makes great rest possible. Let the hours after midnight be a long, slow river, the current almost imperceptible, the banks so low you could step out anywhere and let the mind float on it with no need to steer. And beneath you, the stones of the day lie rounded and harmless, the sharp corners worn by use and washing, and when far ahead, the faintest paleness arise. Not a line yet, only a looseness in the dark. The river will have done its work, and you will have drifted the length of the night without spilling, and the city will stretch. And a rooster will practice his first sentence, and then be satisfied enough to wait for the second. And a baker will open a door that is warm on the inside and cool on the outside. And a fountain will smile in the only way stone can smile, and without any announcement worth the name. The night will complete itself and offer you back to morning, rested, rinsed, ready to take up the gentle tools of another day. Let morning return not as a bright command, but as a remembering. A soft hand finding your elbow. A quiet voice repeating what was said yesterday in words that have learned to be kinder. And in this light, the city offers its meanings without display, the meanings carried by bread and water and stone. By the way people arrange themselves around tasks that do not shout and yet endure, and you feel that what holds Rome together is not only law, or wall, or road, it is agreement. It is consent layered over consent. It is the patience of hands teaching materials to behave, and materials teaching hands to be patient in return. The insula around you is no longer only shelter. It is a book written in rooms and landings and stairs. A book you now know how to read. The chapters are not titled. They are cooked and washed and woven and swept and folded. They are spoken and then spoken again until they become habit. And habit becomes the architecture of peace. Stand by the window where your day began, and notice how the same stripe of sky is a little larger than it seemed last night. Not because it has grown, because your looking has the way attention enlarges a thing without changing it. And let your eye run down the line of tiles to the lane. Let it rest on the curve of the fountain's basin, on the sill where a cat will later take its place, on the polished edge of the door you used yesterday and will use today, and feel how the city is made of edges that have been softened by use rather than dulled by neglect, edges that have learned the courtesy of receiving touch. And this too is instruction, that endurance is not the opposite of tenderness. It is one of its outcomes, that what lasts longest is often what was met gently, repeatedly, without hurry. When you think of Rome, as it will be when you are gone, you find yourself thinking not of triumphs and speeches, but of objects waiting to be found. A small lamp, darkened by good nights. A child's scratched game board on a paving stone where a knee once pressed and a laugh once rose. The rim of a cup smoothed by years of lips that did not consider themselves important and were. A doorpin turned by so many hands that it learned to shine. A burr in a stair whose exact shape will let an archaeologist centuries from now recognize your footfall as human and careful and ordinary. And because you can imagine these things, you also understand museums differently, not as vaults of the rare, but as houses for the patient. Places where the orderly is given enough air that its truth can ripen, and a visitor leaning forward will feel what you feel at this window, that the humble is rich when you leave time on it. Walk the city in your mind as the day offers itself past from hill to market to bath to court to key to shrine not seeking the grand but letting the grand arrive. Incidentally, a column glimpsed through laundry, an inscription cut as if the stone were soft bread, a road mark, reading its own distance aloud in the voice of a mason who was not thinking of us and therefore spoke truly an aqueduct, stepping like a shepherd across a pasture of roofs. And every grandeur, softened by what surrounds it, a woman measuring flour in the shadow of a marble god, a boy tugging a knot loose in a rope that has tied boats since his grandfather was young, a broom finishing the last meter of a porch where orators once rehearsed, and the lesson repeats itself with a patience that makes it inarguable that greatness without kindness is brittle, that the lasting city is the one that remembers how to be small. Consider the roads that leave the walls, their stones fitting like teeth, their ditches honest, their markers steady, and know that they are lines of promise drawn into the country, that they do not merely conquer space. They teach it to be visited. They teach it to be returned from. They are packed with distance, and because of them, stores fill. Mensajes arrive, lovers find a threshold. Soldiers go and come back with minds that must be treated with care, and grain enters the city like a long bright season cut into sacks. And oil comes in amphorae, that smell of press and leaf and dust and river, and fish arrive sleeping on shaved ice like a kindness granted by night to day. And all of this enters your room finally as a meal that asks only appetite and gratitude. And in this chain from road to table you see again the modest heroism of competence. And it seems to you that a civilization may be measured by the dignity granted to good work. Think also of water, which is Rome, a Zaldagrama, the one that shapes breath and time, a fountain that turns alleys into rooms, a cistern that holds the memory of winter, a bath that writes patience into skin, a river that keeps count without needing numbers, and aqueducts that are both engineering and liturgy. Arches repeating until thirst becomes policy, stone repeating until distance becomes neighbor. And you understand that public ease is not an accident, but a choice, that comfort shared is more beautiful than luxury hoarded, that a city is wiser when it spends its genius on what everyone uses with unremarked joy. A basin that never brags, a drain that never fails, a pool that always invites. And you think of your own day. How many times water's small courtesies steadied you? The rinse of a cup, the hand cooled, the face woken, the steam that made a doorless privacy. And gratitude becomes another kind of cleanliness. Light has taught you much too. The way mornings select edges and evenings soften them. The way noon can be persuaded by awning and alley to behave. The way a lamp can lay dignity upon a table that would otherwise be merely a board. And so you think of light as a citizen as well, taxed and granted, husbanded and shared. You think of walls not as boundaries, but as instruments for light, catching and returning. You think of plaster not as finish, but as memory for light, the way it keeps a pale afterglow where gestures were made and words were said. And you feel the responsibility of arranging rooms so that light can be kind to work, and work can be kind to eyes. And this too is a lesson you could carry to any century. That design is the ethics of comfort made visible. Let your reflection touch the people whose names you were not asked to learn. The baker whose first heat is promise. The fuller whose tread rescues cloth. The dr who waits with the patience of seasons for color to consent. The money changer who listens to coins as if they were birds. The scribe who straightens a sentence so a stranger will be treated more fairly. The barber who returns a face to itself. The weaver who makes winter inhabitable. The leather worker who teaches straps to hold kindness at the shoulder. The midwife who attends as if time itself were a patient. The water carrier who does the city's heartbeat in buckets. The watchman who walks the grammar of quiet. And as each figure passes through your thought, you feel the city thicken toward meaning. You feel that history is nothing other than their patience, writ large and long. That monuments without them would be like sentences without verbs, impressive and useless. When grief comes to such a city end, you know it does. You see how these same habits hold. How even sorrow prefers a clean floor and a cup of water, and a chair placed at the right angle to a doorway. How lament sounds better in a room that has been kept. How hands that have practiced gentleness upon cloth can practice it upon a shoulder. How the rhythm of fetching and folding and washing continues, not to numb, but to steady. And you learn that the ordinary is not fragile. It is resilient precisely, because it has been rehearsed through days that were neither terrible nor triumphant. And therefore when the terrible or the triumphant arrives, there is a pattern strong enough to keep a person from falling completely through. There is a temptation, when speaking of Rome, to stand on a high step and declaim. And you feel that temptation now and smile at it and put it aside, because what you have been given by the Insula, and the lane, and the fountain, and the bath, and the roof, and the market, is a quieter eloquence, one that sits rather than stands, one that uses the inside voice, one that trusts the listener to lean closer if needed. And perhaps this is the afterglow you were promised. Not a brightness that forbids sleep, but a warmth under ash. A heat that will still be there in the morning for porridge and for bread. And in this warmth you place the few truths you can carry lightly. That the body loves rhythms more than spectacles. That kindness is architectural. That beauty likes to be useful. That time is softened by tasks done well and repeated. Imagine leaving, as all days require some leaving. Not with trumpets, but with the sober pleasure of having seen closely. Of having handled a hinge and a rope and a loaf and a jar. Of having learned how to count by sounds rather than by numbers. The pitch of water rising in a vessel. The grain of wood under the hand. The syllables of sandals upon stone. And imagine the road carrying you away with the city-s habits tucked into your pockets like folded letters. And later, in another place, you will set a chair where the light will treat a reader kindly. You will sweep with the steady length learned from the landing. You will lay a table so that each object has a little neighborhood around it. You will speak a sentence twice, once to say it and once to make it gentle, and you will find that your life holds together a bit more. And if someone asks where you learned this, you will say Rome, and they will imagine arches, but you will be thinking of hands. Return to the niche before you go, not for ceremony, for balance, a crumb of bread, and a breath of thanks, a glance that includes the day entire without judging it. And let the gods, whether they are stone or memory or gratitude without name, keep the crumb and the breath and the glance, and keep you as well. And then take your cup and rinse it and leave it to dry. Roll your bed and bind it with the strap that always behaves. Fasten the door with its good pin. Step to the stair and descend into the lane that is already shaping this new morning according to the same patient rules. Water and broom and soft speech and the friendly mathematics of shared shade. And understand that nothing you loved last night has been taken. It has been translated into beginning. If you must gather the city into a few portable sentences, let them be these: that Rome is not an argument won, but a meal shared, not a march, but a weaving, not a shout, but a conversation, that expects to last, that a street can be a room, and a room can be a street if attention makes it so. That architecture is a form of listening, that publicings are the most beautiful, when everyone forgets to praise them, because they never fail. That sleep is as civic as law, that a lamp is a small republic where flame and oil practice peace, and that history, when it is at its best, moves at the speed of a person carrying water carefully so as not to spill. Stand once more at the window, then, and let the frame make a picture that includes nothing spectacular. A portion of sky, the color of milk, thinned with blue, a length of tile with last night's cooled gloss upon it, a sliver of plaster wall that has learned the fingerprints of weather, the shoulder of a neighbor passing where the lane pinches to a kindness, the lioness mouth giving water with the patience of stone that is promised and keeps its promise. And if your chest rises a little deeper than usual, it will be because you have found a rhythm worth practicing, and because you know now how to carry it into the hours. When you turn away, do so slowly, not to cling, to match the city's pace, and leave the room as you would leave a friend who is still sleeping, with small, careful sounds, the latch set down rather than dropped, the step taken into place where the floor likes to be stepped on, the curtain pulled so the stripe of sky remains. And in the stair you will find other people moving in this same courtesy, and in the square you will find the fountain already surrounded by the day's first errands. And at the baker's door you will find orange living in the oven's mouth. And at the bath the steam prepares its slow voice, and you will resume the work of consenting to be here, which is the work of any good life. And if, this evening, or some other, you should meet the city again in memorias, you almost certainly will, because memory loves the repeated and the kind. Let it arrive as it arrived today, with a lane rather than a triumphal way, with a lamp rather than a torch, with a table rather than an altar, with hands that know where tools belong and where rest begins, and the afterglow will gather once more, not on your eyelids, but under them, not around you, but in you, and you will sleep as a citizen of any century would wish to sleep, with bread waiting, with water cooled, with a blanket that remembers your shape, with a city outside your window, making the old promises to anyone who needs to hear them. And so the day closes where it opened, a breath drawn and then released, a room that listens and then answers, a city that keeps its patient music, and you, who have walked its ordinary marvels, carry its time in your stride, and its ease in your hands, and its gentleness in your voice. And when your lamp is lowered and the last line of light leaves the wall, the night will not be empty. It will be full of everything that was done properly. It will be full of what will be done properly again tomorrow. And this fullness, quiet and sufficient, is the afterglow.